On market is available to everybody. Finding deals on market is probably possible, but very hard. It's the off market avenues, right? And the different secrets. And this is just one of many, right? Of ways of getting that. And maybe someday the tax sale properties will become on market where they're so widely advertised and that deal opportunity is gone. But you can't find a tax sale property on Zillow, right? You can't find, on any of the standard MLS. So it's just knowing those. And then there's knowing which ones are going to make the auction, and then what do we think it's going to sell for, right? That's all part of that strategy.
I think you'll be happy to hear this as we did our deep research tools, and I asked for 3 key words that kind of surrounded you and your platform. It came up with transparency, education, and ethical practices. How do you expect AI to help enhance the experience in this industry over the next number of years?
One of them, as let's say, existential for us, right, is will it get smart enough to where you can just go do what you've done through a platform, right? I like to think we don't want to go the way of Polaroid. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Hey, digital photos. It's not a thing. That's one simple way. I think probably the way of saving a lot of money on legal fees is it's amazing how accurate and helpful any of these AIs are. And just like basic questions, how do tax sales work in Arizona, right? What are things I need to look out for? It is really good at helping you learn those pitfalls and essentially a paralegal you're talking to that used to be a barrier to entry because you had to pay an attorney that knew a case, which was hard to find.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Leads to Deals podcast, where we talk about everything from leads to deals and everything we talk about leads to deals. I believe you're watching this because you're obsessed with leveling up your life, dominating sales, mastering persuasion, and skyrocketing your financial success. Today's guest, as we'll learn, didn't take the traditional road in entrepreneurship. He started with rockets, literally, from aerospace and systems integration to deep data analysis. Then one day, like any real entrepreneur, he hit a pain point. Instead of whining, he built a solution. That solution that we're going to talk about today, guys, a multi-million-dollar tax lien platform that's changed the game for beginners and experts. If you're brand new and curious about tax liens, or you may be already deep in the game looking for the edge, I believe this episode will be your blueprint. So let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Brian Seidensticker.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome, brother. I look at your guys' industry and the platforms, et cetera, and I see it as like this small cohort of a cohort. So tell me if that kind of saying is true and why. Are there riches in the niches?
Well, yeah, I think it's definitely a niche, and there's niches within the niche, and there's models within those niches within the niche. It definitely, I think probably what makes it so segmented and still profitable and a fairly decent size is the fact that real estate in general is just so massive in the U.S. Tax sales are $8-9 billion a year, right, which isn't insignificant, right? But it's crazy that most folks have never even heard of the space. But yeah, you can definitely do well. We seem to have done pretty well in the space, and find the waters nobody else is swimming in.
Yeah, and I think too, it's one of those things. There's not a lot. There's some leaders, but there's not a lot of people speaking about it, like these other kind of lower barrier entries. And I think this has got not a significant barrier of entry, but I think there's so many get rich quick things that catch people's eyes out there. And like this one, it's so kind of smaller and curtailed to the side, but there's still some get rich quick guys out there. So for you being a pioneer and a leader, what are some of the things that you say, like you hear people saying, hey, be on the lookout for this? Or how do you identify, for me as a novice, how do I identify somebody who's an expert and somebody who's only interested in selling me their course?
Yeah, well, I think anybody associated with the National Taxing Association, they're the only nonprofit association in the space, really the only like true association in the space. So, and they have a certification. I guess technically I'm a certified taxing professional per the NCLA. There's not many of us out there. There's less than 30, but you're not going to really see that. It's not really advertised. I think folks that come across educators, there's a lot of good educators in this space. There's not so great ones. And if you look for things like guaranteed interest, house for pennies on the dollar, like all those sayings, I guess technically aren't lying, but they're not real on a normal basis and not what you should have the expectations for going into it.
Yeah, I get a lot of kids. I have a big outbound agency that I generate leads for like investors nationwide. And I'll have these kids come to me because somehow they came through some funnel out there. Somebody talked about us on TikTok or IG or something. And their mentality, I have to talk them down of is like, they're like, I pay you and I get a Lambo. I'm like, no, you pay me and you get a job, bro. Like you're gonna have to be working these leads, et cetera. And I think that's the thing a lot of people don't understand is once you get your data down and once you start this becomes, I'm not going to say a full-time job, but if you're going to take this seriously, it's going to take up some time. So can you kind of explain like the guys who are doing this for a living, what their day-to-day may look like in this space?
Yeah, for sure. I think it really depends on if they're tax lien investors and tax deed investors, and there's very different styles. Lien investors are more note mortgage passive type investments. And the profile of people in that space typically matches EPAs, accountants, type of personalities, and then the tax deed side, it's much more, it's real estate, right? So anybody that to get their hands dirty on projects and deal with that type of stuff. The profit margin is higher on tax deeds as well. And so they're different profiles, right? The tax lien guys are very data analytics, stare at spreadsheets, stare at information, banker type mentality. And the deed guys are, it's a lot of research, right? It's attending auctions. It's, meeting with contractors, everything that you can imagine dealing with real estate in general.
So one of the things, Brian, I love about AI and GPT is I can go to it and say, "Hey, GPT, can you explain to me, like I'm an 8-year-old, the difference between tax liens and tax deeds?" And it's going to use some analogy with some Lego blocks or just something with crayons or something super simple. So can you be our GPT for that? Can you explain to my listeners who don't know what's the difference between tax lien and tax deeds?
Yeah, you know what? Sure. I think what probably helps is just understanding how they're related, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. Going back to what the heck tax sales are. Everybody in at least in the U.S. Typically has property taxes on real estate that you own. But what people don't really know about is what happens if I don't pay those property taxes. And so uh, the nuance here is every state is slightly different. So I'm gonna describe it in general, right? And
Sure.
in general, this will say how the process works. But you definitely, if you want to get involved, you got to get a lot more detailed in how each specific state works. But if you don't pay your property taxes, basically what the county, right, or municipality is they're having to absorb that loss. They look at it as a loss. They have this potential revenue. They'd love to have that money. They need that money in order to pave the roads, pay the policemen, pay the teachers, etc. And so what they do is they go out to third party investors and say, "Hey, I need my $1,000 in property taxes. Can you cover that for me? And then in return, right, I'll put a lien on the property and I'll sign that lien to you. And then when the property owner, which vast majority of them come back and do pay their property taxes, they pay a penalty, they pay an interest, right, for paying late. I'll give you, investor, that interest when they pay, as opposed to keeping it, as the county." And so that's kind of the deal that's made is the investor gives the county a microloan, right? And in return, they get a lien. And whenever that homeowner redeems the property, they get that lien plus interest, right? Now that's a tax lien, right? You have
Sure.
interest in the property. You don't own the property. You really have no rights to the property at all. Very similar to like a mortgage. Now, also similar to a mortgage is if that lien goes unpaid for whatever amount of time, varies 6 months, up to 5 years, depending on the state. Then you as a lien holder can start a foreclosure process, very similar to a mortgage process, right? And that mortgage foreclosure, or that lien foreclosure, just like a mortgage, culminates in an auction of the property if it's never redeemed in the process. And that sale of the property at that auction is what I call a tax deed. So now you're not just buying interest in the property, you're not giving a microloan to the county, you're actually buying the real estate at the auction. And you have to deal with all the ramifications, upside, downsides of owning that real estate at that point. That's the difference between the two.
Do you find that the majority of people who are kind of in your network that are following you or kind of using some of the resources that you've crafted over the last number of years, are they more on the deed side or just the lien side?
Well, initially Both, right? We actually got started very heavily in the tax lien side only. We were providing services to institutional investors. I turned institutional guys, investing $10 million on up to largest, investor in the space, invest a few $100 million a year in tax liens only, and that's how we built up our network. Now, there's not that many institutional players in the space, and so I'd say, saturated that market, from our growth standpoint fairly quickly. And so we started looking at like, okay, where's the next segment? And tax deeds is a lot larger segment for us, right? As far as quantity of customers out there. And, for example, there's probably less than 150 institutional tax lien investors, and they make up probably 90% of tax liens sold in the US, versus there's tens of thousands of tax deed investors buying properties at auctions. And so volume wise, right, tax deed, we're very tax deed heavy today. Not only the platforms that we build now are much more tax deed centric. We have a capital program, partnership program through Mount North Capital, working pretty much solely with tax deed investors only. And I think just in general for the non-institutional investor, looking to make a good return, understanding, at least a loose understanding of real estate's a little more common. There's just a lot more that we can do and help that segment.
On the lien side, I thought about it. I said, so why would the counties or the state or whomever want to go ahead and sell this position or this right to collect this past due taxes plus interest, plus the reinstatements and all this other side? And then I guess it's like you said, like, hey, we actively, the city or the municipality actively needs this cash. Are they strategic, or is it now so like we don't even care that they just do it almost as soon as it becomes available? They put it out there, or are they allowing it to get a certain size and they're looking at zip codes and they're analyzing it like, no, this one should be better to keep and this price point? Or do they just like, we need cash, go?
I Yeah, I can't speak for every treasurer, but I think the vast majority are the option B, right? They're just, hey, we need cash. I mean, most counties are required to balance the budget. They can't, keep a huge reserve, and so and if they have most like most Americans, they spend every dollar they bring in in many cases, especially today, like they over, so they want every dollar. So they're looking for any opportunity to bring in that dollar.
Is at any point in your guys' life cycle, are you actually dealing with the homeowner themselves directly to acquire either the deed or the lien?
No, well, in general, there's only a couple of states where that happens. So in general, no, right? You don't, especially as a lien holder, you really don't, except for one state, Kentucky. And on the deed side, you don't, right, up until you purchase the property, and then now, whatever happens between you and who, I mean, it's not like the county goes through and vacate the property, right? Whoever's living there, it could be a tenant, could be the previous owner. That is now your responsibility to take care of. And so, from that regard, tax deed investors can interact with previous owners.
It seems like it almost democratizes the process then. So I guess what I mean by that is if you're not dealing directly with the seller or the homeowner, excuse me, the person who actually has the lien, then there's no like relationship that you're building. There's no communication where you're trying to get the first envelope in their mail to be able to buy it, like in some of the other off market type acquisitions. So, how, if it's just purely a dollar value, how are you getting any strategic edge over your competition if we all have the same pool and there's nothing that takes anything special other than an extra click of the bid? How do I outbeat my competitors?
Yeah. So, well, you hit on something that I certainly wasn't answering from that perspective. There is definitely a segment of investors out there, savvy investors, that are doing what I'll call front running. Right? It's like, hey, I think there's a lot of our users that maybe I don't interact with, but they're using our platform, for this, where they're just seeing what properties are coming up for auction. They know they're obviously motivated, and then they're trying to communicate in some other fashion, right, with the previous owner, saying, "Hey, I see you're in a tough spot. Maybe I can buy your house. You might as well get something out of the deal, as opposed to letting it go through its process and maybe scraping the overage amount that left at the end of the day." And so I think there's definitely some savvy investors that recognize that and utilize that model successfully. I'm sure it's not easy, right? It's a little bit of a needle in the haystack of figuring out who to contact, right? They're obviously not going to be in a great mood, so you got to have the right approach, to them. But are there deals to be had there for sure? So besides that, like, how do you get your leg up on actually attending the auctions? And believe me, there's certain parts of the country that you can't, right? There's just so much competition. I use Southern Florida. I pick on Southern Florida just because the taxi market down there is like, why buy at a tax deed auction when you pay the same price as you're going to pay through the MLS, and you don't get marketable title, you get all this other crap that you can inherit. Like, it just doesn't make sense why people are buying them at the prices they're doing, but it's happening, right? And so, do I typically tell folks, go look in Southern Florida to buy a good deal? No. But there's markets where it's not efficient. And it's not efficient for a lot of reasons. It could be they're still doing live auctions. It could be they do them, once a year. So how do you know that they're happening, right? So there's different ways of getting a leg up and attending those auctions. That's part of our partnership program through Mountain Earth Capital is not just the money, but we help point people in the right direction because that's what we do. We have all the analytics. We know where good deals are. We know where bad deals are. That's part of the partner. That's part of what we bring to the partnership.
That's nice. All right. So it's more about identifying them, knowing where maybe you can have a competitive edge just by showing up because there may be less saturation in that market, which is, you know, obviously a benefit of itself. And that all comes from the data side, I'm assuming, of your guys' platform. I want to ask though, real quick on the tax lien side, does this become a bit of a commodity in the industry where people are trading those, or can you sell your positions? And is that something like you see people sell notes, or typically that's just not the point? You're just keeping it for yourself.
There is the option of, they call it reassignment of portfolios. So it's like selling your position, and it does happen. Lien holders will trade portfolios. It was much more common in like the 2015, 2016. And we were fairly instrumental in trading a lot of portfolios back in the day. But today's world with like the lien side is so competitive, right? There's more institutional investment in that space, less product. And so typically no one's trading like portfolios of good quality, right? It's usually, hey, one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? And it like the guy just wants that piece of the portfolio out the door because and whoever's buying it's found some magic sauce that the other guy hasn't, and it's just not a common thing. It's not like everyday investors get in the space can go like, hey, here's a marketplace of liens, great liens to buy. That just it has been that way in the past. It probably will happen again. Not right now.
From the investor side, there's states that are disclosure and non-disclosure. And so you have these just core fundamentals that make it really tough to run analysis, especially if you're out of state, et cetera. Do you say, hey, listen, here's like my top 5 favorite states or my top regions where just technically it's easier to analyze the properties if you're not from there? Or most of the people who are following your guys' leads doing it in their own backyard so they have kind of boots on the ground knowledge coupled with your platforms?
So I'd say the general investor is doing the latter, right? As they have the areas that they're comfortable with, right? They know what they want to buy stuff. And tax deeds is just another avenue of buying property. It's much more cash intensive. It's a little harder, right? But in today's world, that might be well worth it. Now we do, in the partnership program, there's actually the platform does some discount scoring, right? Basically the tax deed version of comps, right? Of like what stuff is selling for versus what actual value is, what's the likelihood of the properties making it to auction. And so if you are flexible in where you want to go, that's the guidance. That's like, hey, this is a lot better deal on average. You're going to have a lot more likelihood to buy it. And that's, so instead of feeling like you're shooting in the dark, and so many new investors get in the space, they get all excited and they see the opening bid of $10,000, which the back tax is due. And they're like, oh, I'll be willing to bid, $150K for this property. It's worth 300. And then they are absolutely appalled when it sells for 250, right? We can help guide them away from those to properties where, it starts at 10, but maybe it sells for 90, not 250. That's kind of the.
And again, for a novice, are the cities going to like auction.com and some of these other third-party auction sites to utilize that? And then we're just pointing them as to where to bid and kind of what their offer should be? Is that what tax saleresources.com is doing?
Well, we're not selling them directly for the counties.
But that's one of the platforms though that the counties use?
Well, they don't use ours for selling, right? There are I'll
Understood.
say
The
seller centric.
auction.com, one of those
Yeah,
guys?
well, yeah, auction.com, bid for assets, real auction, grant. There's several of them out there. And those are, I'd say, seller centric, right? And so they have a contract with the county. They put the information up there. I'd say one positive of COVID is prior to COVID, there was Florida and maybe 10 other jurisdictions nationwide that had online auctions. And then COVID obviously shut all that down. Nobody was having live auctions. And so I'd say today there's probably 65, 70% of those auctions, about 9,000 a year, that are online using one of those platforms. What TSRs is more investor centric, meaning we can buy all of those platforms in one place, and so you don't have to go one platform or one auction to one auction trying to figure this. Hey, I'm just after you know commercial properties, 50,000 square feet or more. You can't do that on a statewide level through one of those other, I'll say, sellers platforms. You can do that within tax a resource and say, hey, nationwide, this is what I'm looking for. Tell me what's out there. I have one of the guys that works with us, loves to show people. I don't know why he picks bowling alleys. There always seems to be a couple bowling alleys for sale out there, but how could you pick that out? I mean, it's truly a needle in a haystack scenario, but he likes to go show people how you can do it in a few seconds.
That's amazing. I want to share this, and maybe it's anecdotal. This was probably 7, 8 years ago, actually longer than that. I went on auction.com. I saw a condo down in Brickell, Miami that I really liked. It was in a building I had a friend with, and I was just going to buy it just so I had a place to hang out because I lived in Fort Lauderdale. And registered it all in, did whatever you had to do, and started bidding. And then ultimately, I was the high bidder, and I knew where my number was. But then, and somebody outbid me. I said, "Damn, can't believe somebody like I have a reason." Then I bid again, and somebody outbid me, and it happened a couple of times, and it felt weird. And then ultimately, I bailed out after like the 6th or 7th time because it just made no more sense. And it honestly, I didn't think anybody would be there. And then as soon as the auction's over, immediately get an email saying, "Hey, by the way, the other bid defaulted and it came back to you." And I said, something doesn't feel right. And so then I devoured the TOS, the terms of service, and I realized that they could artificially bid me up. The platform itself could Did you know that that can happen in some of
Yeah,
these sites?
I had heard of that. I didn't realize the terms of service have actually outlined that, but I've heard of people, basically stating that they did that and then like basically gave up and like, oh, hey, you could buy this. That makes a whole lot of sense. It's like, which
It's the
seems so wrong.
auctioneer.
Yeah.
It feels so wrong, but the auctioneer is allowed to put in a bid to see if you'll go higher. And I said, "Well, that's crazy." And so I never went back to that left a bad taste in my mouth. And so I was just curious into 2025, which it sounds like you've done. It's gone more from the courthouse steps to online platforms
Hmm.
for sure, right?
Yes, for
That
sure.
that that's really interesting, but also allows it to be, for us to do it virtually wherever we may be sitting. And so I think about your industry, and speed to data is really, really important. And so being able to know when they're pending to come up or when they're coming up has got to be the market advantage, right? Do you, do you kind of have your eyes on it before it goes to the auction through the taxsaleresources.com, or is it an aggregate for once they are already? Like, what's the kind of advanced notice that you get so that way I can get my capital ready to deploy?
Yeah, and we're threading a needle as timing wise, because at least from we built the platform and process to tailor to folks that are going to go to the auction, right? And that
Understood.
isn't necessarily optimized for the front runners, per
Sure.
se. And so we concentrate on basically a 4-week time period prior to the auction is where we basically collect what is going to go to the auction at that time. And there's usually a list available well before then, but most of that stuff disappears. People redeem, etc. And so, why, for investors that are going to go to the auction is like, why race research on 70% of the list is going to disappear, right? And there's still going to be a good chunk that disappears between 4 weeks and the day of the auction, but it's at least somewhat minimized and gives them enough time. We didn't start with a 4-week time, but it's kind of where we landed. We tried it longer, we tried it shorter. 4 weeks is where we landed to be that sweet spot of enough time to do what you need to do your research, and not so far in advance that you're doing too much wasted research on all the stuff that disappears.
Yeah. I heard of this model like 6 years ago. It's a buddy that has a mortgage business that me and him have a partnership in now. And he was like, "Man, they got this tax deed sale thing, and let me just tell you what's going to happen. And we kind of spun up this campaign, but it was super competitive. And it was something along the lines, if memory serves me correctly, where we were contacting people where it showed that they were owed something from the city or from the municipality, and it was never claimed by them. And it was contacting them up and saying, hey, listen, we'll go through the process. We'll take it's like a rev share on the back end about all this found money, et cetera, et cetera. How does that is that a thing where some of these municipalities have money post the sale, but they don't just find the person to give it back?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's called we call it overages. There's lots of excess
Overages.
funds. But the opening bid amount is what's due to the county. Anything above and beyond that is technically an overage, right? Now that overage can be claimed by other lien holders, right? If there's a mortgage, like mortgages get wiped out, the tax unique, but if there's a mortgage on the property, they can claim those funds, right? If there's a mechanics lien, they can claim those funds. But whatever is left after whatever's claimed, then technically that's due to the previous owner. But what counties rarely, I've heard of good treasurers, reaching out to their constituents saying, "Hey, you got this money, come get it." But in general, that doesn't happen. The homeowner has to know, "Hey, I need to come forward and ask for that money." And the reality is, very, very, very few people even know that the thing. So I've heard of. We haven't participated. I've heard of and actually communicated with quite a few folks that do this successfully. The trick is you can't just go claim it on their behalf. You have to get in touch with the previous owner, somebody that has that interest and right to claim. And in some states, you've got to be a legal attorney. You've got to get all these agreements signed. It's a thing, but you guys it be done the right way. It's not easy. Kind of what you were saying. It's a lot of work, but it is a legitimate space. It is, when we talk about niche within niche, it's a niche within niche within a niche, probably within a niche, right, to make that work. But it is an angle.
Yeah, it was interesting how many people had already hit that list. Like, so I tried it for a little bit. It was not enjoyable. I was like, this is. I mean, you would get the people, but then you also got to understand, and that's why I was asking in the beginning about how if you guys deal with the actual owner, because I think you correctly put it, it's like you got to have on like delicate white gloves with these people. They've been through a lot. They're in collections everywhere in their life. Their credit cards, their water bills, the house. I mean, and so you're dealing with somebody who's got that. The predisposition to click and hang up. And the worst part is they actually have some extra money, but it seems like a lot of times people do it strategically. If they're letting it go, and I guess maybe help me wrap my head around this. If I owe 30,000 in taxes and my as is value is 26, I don't care anymore. So what happens in that situation where the city itself is over under? Do they discount at the auctions or what happens there?
Typically not, right? So there is the advent of whoever has the lien, which can be the city, right? But usually it's a private investor. If nobody buys it at auction, then that whoever owns the lien ends up with the deed to the property. And in some cases that is the city. And there are city or state or sorry, county, typically it's county. County owned properties who come over the counter deed lists is what we call them, and we follow those. And it's real estate that was essentially foreclosed on, is being held in many cases, is for sale. But nobody's bought it right at those auctions, and rarely, unless it's a very rural area, rarely is nobody at an auction. And so the value of those properties is definitely a one man trash, the man's treasure. You got to have a very disposition process or plan for that. It's not going to be a grade A $1 million home on the street that never ends up in that bucket.
Sure. And so what does the city do again with it though? If nobody actually places a bid to match the taxes because it's not worth the taxes, the city takes it. It's
Well,
theirs.
if the lien was foreclosed on by the county, I said city in error, but if the county owned the lien, then the county will end up owning it. If the lien was bought by a private investor, then the private investor will end up owning the property. It becomes REO, just like bank, mortgage REO.
I think everybody knew this, the way the Supreme Court would ultimately weigh on this whole topic, but everybody who had heard this before felt icky about it. The fact that there is a number of municipalities nationwide, and please provide clarity, that they would keep that overage. That if you lost the house and it sold for 150 and you only owed $400 and you lost the house because of that technicality, the city was pocketing that 149,600. So kind of give us the history on that, because that had to have changed the game for you guys and really everybody.
Yes, yeah, you're alluding to, it was a Tyler Hennepin Supreme Court case that we actually started back in 2017, had the ruling 2023, I think is when they finally brought the ruling down. But basically made the right, I 100% agree they made the right decision. Like cities, municipalities should not be like profiting from this process. That just doesn't seem right. But yeah, there were some states where the statutes allowed the counties, typically a jurisdiction, sometimes municipalities, sometimes the county, but usually county, to profit above and beyond what they're owed. And the Supreme Court essentially said, nope, you certainly have the right to enforce, you certainly have the right to collect what's due to you, but you do not have a right to keep that overage, right? You at least at a minimum need to make that available to the previous owner. Now, in reality, how much of that overage is being, it's right back to that overage business. Like how many of those folks are actually aware of it and going to, able to collect it? I think it's a low percentage, but just the advent of municipalities or jurisdictions doing this with the intent of making that over just doesn't seem right. At least this, somewhat takes it away and makes it fair, right? I think was the right word.
Yeah, it seems un-American to me, for the government to overstep. And so I don't know if it was Hennepin County, but I had heard throughout as all this was going on over the years, though, some of these municipalities or counties saying, but judge, we can't give this money back. We've already spent it. Like it would bankrupt our entire city. It's like, but it wasn't yours, buddy. Like you spent something that wasn't yours. And so is there like a clawback going on out there where people are like, "Oh, I lost it in 2012," or does it have to be in front of the ruling, behind the ruling? How does that happen? Do you
Well, that is still being argued and probably will for years, right? Of like, okay, well, was there statute of limitations? What is the statute of limitations? And it's really state by state, right? In general, you're exactly right, and and not just counties, right? There's some instances where the state has ruled. Nebraska actually has ruled where the investor who bought the lien and ended up banking or pocketing that large overage amount, they're saying they are responsible, right? And I think that still has to work through, all the, because investors are likely going to fight that all the way back up to the Supreme Court, right? And so we're, years, if not decades away from that ultimately. And by that, and my feeling is by the time that all gets worked out, they'll, be able to lean on statute of limitations and say, well, what's in the past is in the past, right? Let's fix it going forward. I don't know the right decision. I do know like states that allowed the counties to pocket that. Minnesota is one, Michigan is another. Those are two of the main ones that I'm aware of. Yeah, they probably would bankrupt a lot of the counties if they said, hey, for the last 80 years, all that overage that you guys are spending, you owe that to somebody. Um, I don't know what would happen, right? But I know like something's going to happen. And there's certainly states where class action lawsuits are popping up left and right due to that.
I think about your industry, and obviously I had heard about it before COVID, but what you're saying about COVID, how it kind of put everything online in a capacity, seems like to me it probably really opened it up to a degree. But what about the research of the data? Because there's still so many counties out there where there's not everything, especially the more rural or old school or maybe less funded. They just don't have all the documents available online that you would maybe want to analyze or be able to even see that these things are pending. So how are you guys still dealing with legacy counties, or does that even exist in 2025 anymore?
Oh yeah, it's, there's definitely counties out there where it's still 1935, right? There's still municipalities, and New Jersey's one where it's actually done at the city level, and there's 566 different ones in New Jersey, and we still literally get a newspaper. That's the only list that gets released is a newspaper that we get delivered, and that's our starting point, right? We have to put that into a format that's standardized, and then we go out and process the data, right? And when we got started in the space back in 2008 doing that, right? Just that simple, process didn't exist. There was no, where do you go to figure out when the auctions are, where they are, what are the properties? We were solving that problem originally, and then eventually it's like, hey, how about the property data in there, right? Hey, where are the better deals? Hey, where's the capital? We kind of been on this continuous journey of trying to figure out the latest problem and solve the problem for them. But yes, there are areas where, and that's kind of the alluding to, where do you get better deals? Typically where it's less efficient, less competition. In those old school counties, a lot of times is where you can get the better deals. Where it's harder for everybody is typically where you can do better. So it's good and bad depending on your approach.
Yeah. I see obviously technology is it's moving faster than it's ever moved. Like my mind is daily blown. I'll share this as a sidestep for anybody who's, listening, got a podcast, whatever. Brian, before you got on, I did this podcast with you before you got on. I used Notebook LM. I had done a deep research thing on there. I put it into Notebook LM. I pressed it on podcast version. And it was actually two people talking about you and your sister's journey and everything you had been through. And then I could interject into it. And so, like, even something like this, podcast prep has never been easier than it is right now. And so, how do you, for your guys' space, for the people who follow and are members or sign up for tax sale resources, how do you expect AI to help enhance the experience in this industry over the next number of years?
Well, I think one of them, as let's say, existential for us, right, is will it get smart enough to where you can just go do what you've done through a platform, right? I like to think we don't want to go the way of Kodak, right, or I think it was Kodak, right? Where it's um or Polaroid, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Hey, digital photos, it's not a thing. Then they went out of business, right? And so we're trying to embrace it and utilize it,
Yes.
implement it as much as we can. That's one simple way. I mean, I think probably the way of saving a lot of money on legal fees is it's amazing how accurate and helpful any of these AIs are, and just like basic questions. How do tax sales work in Arizona, right? What are things I need to look out for? It is really good at helping you learn those pitfalls, and essentially a paralegal you're talking to that used to be a barrier to entry because you had to pay an attorney that knew the case, which was hard to find. You had to pay them a very high hourly rate to learn those things, and most people didn't want to spend $5,000 just to learn and not ever know if they're going to spend $1. And in today's world, you can get that same level of education really for almost free.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
huge danger.
I talked about this yesterday I was having a cigar at a cigar bar, and we were talking about how attorneys and accountants, that there's going to be so much of that entry level of those two white collar spaces that are going to be, I don't say decimated, but more streamlined, as any company should be with these types of tools. And I think about data guys like you and your platform, and I say, oh man, I'm so excited because at some point the future is predicated off the past. And so you guys know which counties have X amount, and you know which counties are normally 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and which ones you ultimately see flipped and have a better. And maybe it helps you and additionally in the front running. So I think with all the factors that come in by having access to every address in the nation, and then what happens there and what square footage performs best, I really think that ultimately being able to integrate something like that just helps you, at least on the analysis side, be able to make better decisions. And so, yeah, I agree. I think guys like us will utilize it to cannibalize others. And then ultimately, like I said, who knows, existentially, you might just be able to say, hey, where's the best tax deed available to me in Southeast United States within the next 24 hours? And then boom, you might get that answer.
Yeah. Yeah, it might get. I mean, I doubt that'll ever, because it's defined best. That's
Yeah, exactly.
we
Best for me.
yeah. It's like, well, it's as long as you define that up front, right?
Yeah.
Because I get questions all the time. Well, where do I get the best deal? And it's not the same answer for folks. So, well, what type of property? Where are you looking for? How long you want to hold it?
What's your exit strategy?
Right.
Exactly.
So as long as you put all that stuff in, and you maybe can get to that answer interacting with it, um, maybe someday
Yeah.
but I think it'll eventually happen. It's more of a when as an if.
Yeah.
For sure.
So tell us about tax sale resources, why you created it, what its impact has been, and what the 7-day trial is all about.
Yeah. Well, so got started in the space simply. I literally got started on the wrong side. I had a tax lien against a property I was flipping in 2007. And Montana's a weird state, where every potential investor has to send you a certified letter. I got flooded with these certified letters. Hey, I'm lien on your house. And because of that, it took me a lot of years to realize that, but because I got so many from different is what sparked my curiosity and saying, what the heck is this all about? If I had gotten one letter from the county stating this, it would have been just like any other notice. I would have paid it, the taxes, and been on my merry way. But the fact that I was getting these from all these like individuals is like, what is this all about? So anyway, it set me down the path of investigating tax lien investing. Eventually figured out like this is a real thing, can make decent money. I'd recognize, okay, flipping houses at this time in history is not the best idea. Maybe I start buying liens, and that's what we did in Montana and Wyoming. But what didn't exist is the simple, where are these auctions? What are the properties lists, right? It was a very manual aggregating process. And so I had my right-hand woman, my sister, Rachel, who has been with me since day one, researching that type of stuff. And we just needed a simple platform to share that information back and forth. This is before, so many better solutions, OneDrive, Google Drive,
Sure.
Box, so many better solutions than what we did. But I didn't know of those. Maybe they were in fledgling. I'm
Sure.
an engineer. I knew how to build basic websites. I built a basic website just for internal uses, right? I would put in needs in there. Rachel would, populate the information, and then we could make the decisions on what liens we wanted to buy. It wasn't until an investor came along, a friend and investor, had said, "Hey, that's pretty cool. Why don't you make that public?" And that's how really Tax Sale Resources was born, was taking what our internal tool was, making it open to the public. And by 2012, the revenue from that had so far outweighed what we were making on the direct investing. I gave up investing for many years. We restarted it through the fund in 2020. That was kind of a, fell in our lap, if you will, kind of in a weird way. And, I guess also kind of learned a lesson, but I wouldn't change any of that, right? I think that's part of life.
So 26,000 people over time have collectively been a part of this. Is it more a community or a tool?
It's a tool. I mean, we wanted it, tried the community route at one time, found that people that want to learn, there's plethora of those, people that are willing to educate, very, very few of those. They feel like they're giving away their secret sauce. And I had many conversations because we couldn't answer everybody's questions, right? The whole thought was, hey, maybe they'll coordinate, a guy in California talking to a guy in New York, like they're not technically at competition, but I was wrong. They all felt like they're in competition with one another. And so it just didn't work out. It's definitely very much a tool. And I probably should update the site, because I think we're actually at over 60,000 folks that have signed up
Wow.
for the
You
platform.
definitely should.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
It's
I
been great.
what's kind of like your ascension model? Like, obviously, I want to come in, I want to discover, and then what can I unlock as I continue to get a little bit deeper into this kind of platform you got built for us?
Well, what we found is, over the years, and especially in today's world, the really hard thing to figure out is, where do you get better deals, right? And that's we paired that with our amount of capital partnership program. We call it our accelerator program, where it's, hey, if you really do want to get into, it's not for everybody, but if you really want to get into the space and be successful, then we'll partner with you. We'll provide the majority of the capital on these purchases, but then we'll also teach you how to utilize the platform. We'll unlock some features of the platform that aren't for everybody, that helps point you in the right direction. And the accelerator program is really intended to take somebody that knows what they're doing to some degree. One thing we don't do is the educational component. But once you do know what you're doing, we can help you be immensely successful.
You know what I love about this is it's just another avenue to get like off market deal. And, being a real estate investor, it really is so important at what you're buying it for. And so I see this and it's like, man, this unlocks in my head a whole nother highway, if you will, of deals. And sometimes, hey, I'll take this highway. Sometimes I'll take this one for direct to seller. And this one is off market. But all these allow me to have a strategic advantage over just MLS, because there's so many doctors, whoever it may be, who are kind of getting into the investment space, and they ultimately pay retail or higher because they're out there only shopping in this one hyper competitive pool called the MLS. And it just seems like it's going to open up more opportunities for me to get something that everybody else doesn't necessarily have access to.
Yes, and that's exactly right. Is that, the on market is available to everybody, right? Finding deals on market is probably possible, but very hard. It's the off market avenues, right? And the different secrets. And this is just one of many, right? Of ways of getting that. And maybe someday the tax sale properties will become on market, where they're so widely advertised, then that deal opportunity is gone. But you can't find a tax sale property on Zillow, right? You can't find, on any of the standard MLS. So it's just knowing those, right? And then there's the all right, knowing which ones are going to make the auction, and then what do we think it's going to sell for, right? That's all part of that strategy.
I think you'll be happy to hear this as we did our deep research tools and I asked for three key words that kind of surrounded you and your platform. It came up with transparency, education, and ethical practices. So with those three things, why does Dave Ramsey hate you so much?
Well, I probably because we took what they were doing and made it better. And you know, that's funny. I you know I don't know. I guess is the short answer.
Not you, just to be clear. I don't even know if he knows you, but he rails on this industry all the time, and he's even recently put out some really fiery content. And so I just wanted to know why you think that he feels this way.
I think this industry in general has a bad rap, right? And I think, and a lot of it is well deserved. I won't lie. I mean, I think there's been some players in the past. It's not it's an unregulated space, right? You don't have to have a license to do this. And probably a lot of people, including myself, feel like you should. That's part of the CTLP program and like NTO trying to offer that. But then on top of that, you have nobody likes taxes, nobody likes property taxes, and certainly everybody would hate losing their property due to property taxes. And so all that is legitimate. I think the Tyler Hennepin thing plugged a giant hole of that icky feeling, like you said. But I think there's a segment, and actually the majority of investors in the space, at least that we work with, are doing it for the right reasons, right? And, the tax sale properties that make it to auction are vast majority the worst houses on the street. Nobody knows what to do with them, and I can't tell you how many investors we work with and have talked to who have had nothing but praises brought to them by the neighbors when they take that they crack house in the corner and turn it into a legitimate asset for their neighbors. And that's how we feel, and that's how what we strive for is actually helping the communities that we're working with in all the different ways that we can do that, and not from a lens of taking advantage of it. We have our theory of in every investment that we're doing is if the previous owner has a legitimate way and really wants that property back and is willing to work with you, we will bend over backwards to make that happen. Because that's not what we are. That's not what we stand for.
Yeah, I agree. And by default, there's redemption periods after you guys research it that are built into these. But it's just the fact of, and I feel the same way buying off market, really rough places. A lot of times it's somebody who's inherited a home, they live out of state, the house is boarded up, it's a blight on the street, the grass is overgrown, there's animals living there, cats. It's the risk now. There's extra bars on the window that wouldn't naturally be there if somebody's living there. It can really not only just drive prices down, but drive morale of being on that street down. You don't feel comfortable with your kids walking past your next door neighbor house because somebody may be living there and it may be used for. And so anybody who's stepping up to the plate and helping to accomplish and revitalize and help grow the community, I think that they deserve that equity gain that they may get, because otherwise it's just going to get worse and it's going to hurt other people. So I love it, man. Brian, what's the website again?
Real creative, taxsaleresources.com.
I love it. So people, if they want to learn more when they're ready to bolt this on, and it just seems so simple, I encourage anybody out there, just go check it out. Go on there. You can see all the advantages and resources that are there. You can even grab you a really inexpensive trial to get behind the scenes and be able to see what's more behind the platform. But I think you've done a great job of at least enlightening me and our followers, our viewers, as to how this can be another tool in our tool belt to get off-market properties, get access to properties that not everybody else necessarily has the skill set or platforms, the tools available to get them. So I thank you, Brian, for coming out and sharing with us more about taxsaleresources.com. Thank you, bud.
I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, man.